Good evening, everyone. On behalf of our president, Dr. Danny Habuki, and our entire global community, I'd like to welcome you all to Soka University of America. Critical Conversations at Soka is a community speaker series that features artists, instigators, and thought leaders in order to ignite ideas and stimulate conversations throughout Orange County. Tonight, we are proud to be featuring Dr. Vandana Shiva to discuss the future of the planet. My name is Clarice Lee, and I'm an environmental studies student and graduating 4th year at Soka University. I discovered my passion for environmental studies when I first took an Introduction to Climate Change class in my 2nd year. It was from this point on that I knew I wanted to pursue a career that addresses the pressing and urgent environmental issues we face as a global community. It is also from this realization that I truly commend Dr. Shiva for her revolutionary work and her commitment to protecting biodiversity, indigenous knowledge, and women's rights. Before we continue, I'd like you to help me thank our partners for this event. The Orange County Register, the Women in Green Forum, the premier conference highlighting women's impact on the environmental industry. And finally, Barnes & Noble's booksellers, who are on hand in the lobby selling books that Dr. Shiva will autograph in our post-event dessert reception. I also want to give a special thanks to the high school groups who are attending tonight's event and invite you to give yourselves a round of applause. I hope some of you will one day be able to attend Soka University of America. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Jamie Nack, who is the founder and CEO of One Drop Interactive. One Drop is the world's first online platform engaging employees in sustainability in order to create a ripple effect across their company, their community, and ultimately the globe. In 2011, Jamie was named as a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum, and she received a federal appointment to serve as a member of the National Women's Business Council, an advisory council to the President, Congress, and the U.S. Small Business Administration. Jamie also proudly serves as one of Al Gore's presenters for the Climate Reality Project, and is the founder and producer of the Women in Green Forum. Today is an extra special day for Jamie, as this morning she was presented with the Green Leadership Award in the business category from the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors. Please join me in welcoming Jamie Nack to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Clarice, and thank you, Soka, for having such a great auditorium here, and to all of you for joining us this evening. It is really quite an honor for me to share the stage with one of my personal heroes. Some refer to our guest, Dr. Vandana Shiva, as the Gandhi of grain. Others have compared the impact of her work to that of Mother Teresa's. If she personally accepted all of the awards, degrees, and honors offered to her, she would have time for little else. She's a very, very busy woman. Just to give you an idea of some of the awards that she's won to date, Dr. Vandana Shiva has been awarded the Right Livelihood Award, which is often called the Alternative Nobel Prize. She's received the Sydney Peace Prize, the Calgary Peace Prize, the Yoko Ono Grant for Peace Award. Time magazine has named her an environmental hero. Asia Week has called her one of the 5 most powerful communicators in all of Asia. Forbes has named her one of the top 7 most powerful women on the globe. Those are just a few. She also holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of Western Ontario, and she has received honorary doctorates from universities in Paris, Oslo, Toronto, and many others. She's a force for good, and she's a force for positive change. You are really in for an inspiring and educational evening tonight. And I'd like to share a short video with you just to give you a glimpse of the world and the works of Dr. Vandana Shiva.
Food is a weapon. They said when you sell real weapons and arms, you control armies. When you control food, you control society. When you control seed, you control life on earth. It just so happens that throughout history, in every culture, it's women who kept the seed. I'm born in the Himalayan forest, and non-separation from nature was quite clearly a lesson. We had a classroom out in those forests. I chose as a young child to do physics, even though the schools I went to didn't offer it, because for me, physics was about understanding how the world works. So at the end of it, I did a PhD in foundations of quantum theory, and it's quantum theory that taught me how to make connections. Because of my book, I got invited to a biotech meeting where I realized what the industry wanted to do with the seed, which is to take control of the seed through patenting. That's when I started. I took a commitment to start saving seeds, but I also realized it's not enough to talk anymore. Got to do it. 40% of the solution to climate change lies in organic, ecological farming in the hands of small farmers. Can't wait for governments and corporations to make the shift. People must. A GMO forced on people without a label is a criminal act.
Monsanto is proud to be the industry leader in agricultural innovation.
Monsanto sneaked into the budget law a clause that no court could ever rule against them.
We're committed to helping farmers double yields by 2030.
GMOs haven't produced more. There's only one way: ecological farms, small farms. And yet, we get the propaganda: without GMOs, people will starve. Without chemicals, people will starve. We have enough innovation and technologies to grow more food without killing our farmers. You have to throw the light of disclosure in order to break these secret bonds between manipulated officials, manipulated GMOs, and manipulated science. This is Gandhi. 7 social sins. Politics without principles, wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, worship without sacrifice. If I hadn't felt the imperative to come back to India, both to answer the puzzle of the disconnect between big science and big poverty, as well as just the surge to give back. I didn't know how I'd give back, but I had to give back. Little old lady from India. Oh, why does she drive you nuts?
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Vandana Shiva to the stage.
Thank you, Jane.
Okay, this is quite an honor. Thank you for being here with us today.
My joy.
I would love for you to share a little bit about your journey. Let's take it way back to when you were a seedling, growing up in the Himalayas, surrounded by nature. What were your first memories, or how did that inspire you?
My first memories are collecting acorns in oak forests, playing in the springs, pure, clean water, more and more difficult to find, collecting ferns in the forest, wildflowers.
Beautiful. And you've talked a lot about how growing up as a young woman, as a little girl, and coming back and seeing your home and seeing the forests that you played in disappear almost before your eyes, and that really served to inspire and fuel your activism. And can you share with us how that impacted you and how that's been your fuel to today?
Yeah, I was studying physics, and then I eventually decided to go to Canada to do my PhD in the foundations of quantum theory. And I just wanted to visit my favorite spots, the favorite forests, swim in my favorite streams before leaving, to carry all of that in my heart. And the streams were gone and the forests were gone. And that's when I started to look around and ask, and found this beautiful, spontaneous grassroots movement growing, which got the name Chipko, which means to hug. And you know, the parts of the world, including this country, where tree huggers is partly a swear word. But you know, for me, that became the commitment. I said, I'm going to return to be a volunteer for this movement in every vacation, every holiday, summer, winter, even while I followed my PhD in the foundations of quantum theory. And it took about a decade. By 81, as a result of new flooding because of deforestation, the government was forced to wake up to what the women were saying, that these forests are not this much square foot of timber. They are the sources of our soil, our water, our pure air. And that's what they should be protected for. And after 81, logging was banned in the high Himalaya where I come from.
Nice. Very nice. And so for you, it was a bit of a contrast between going to college in Western Ontario and then coming home and this Chipko movement. Can you describe a little bit about what pulled you back and what inspired you to join this Chipko movement?
Well, what pulled me back was, you know, I just loved the mountains and the forests, and this was my home, this was my identity. And I felt the pain of the destruction in a very physical way. Because, for me, my body didn't end here. My body extended to those waters and those forests. And I think the fact that I sort of crossed between a PhD in the West and constantly coming back to my home in the forests and learning from women who'd never been to school. It cultivated in me a humility. It both cultivated a deeper striving for knowledge, but also a humility that it doesn't matter if you haven't been to university. There are other ways you learn and there's other knowledges you have. And I've always treated the women of Chipko, the peasants of the Himalaya, as my other professors. I had professors at the university, but they are my professors of ecology.
Beautiful. Now, how do you relate to, I'm sure many of us in the room did not have the benefit of growing up surrounded by the nature and the forests and the streams, and we grew up in more of the concrete jungle of the city life. But yet, you've been able to connect, and your message resonates with those of us as well who were the city dwellers, and you've been able to build this global movement of support behind you. So how do you connect to those who might not have never had that personal experience with nature or with the life and ways of farmers?
Well, if you think that you have to be born in a forest to be an ecologist, we are quite condemned. But thank goodness there isn't that kind of determinism. Thank goodness there is a possibility to become aware of this beautiful earth and how it creates the conditions of our lives, wherever you are. You could be in wilderness, or you could be in a city. And at the end of the day, you get pollution to certain levels, as in Delhi, and people start to realize that air is not a luxury, that your poor lungs are paying the price for all of that pollution from the automobiles. And people start to think about pollution. And I think because of the way our food system has got so messed up, you can be in a city, but we, again, don't have the luxury to think you can eat junk, you can eat poison, you can eat anything that causes harm. And more, at least in this country, the movement towards ecological agriculture is being driven from the city. It's being driven from those who say we will eat better. That's how we've got this explosion of farmers' markets, community-supported agriculture. All of this is a whole new partnership. And in India, I've started Navdanya, the movement for seed saving and organic farming, and we're making tighter and tighter connections between farms and people in the city. So, we have, there's these very fashionable words these days of smartness. So every country wants smart cities now, and as does my country. And so we started a program. We said, food smart cities. That's what we need. But also, we have a huge movement on gardens. I call them gardens of hope. And in schools in the cities, in the heart of Delhi, we work with about 100 schools. Okay. Some of them don't even have soil, but they're putting pots on their terraces. So because we are alive, because of nature's gifts, the water, the air, the food, doesn't take too much to realize we've got to protect this beautiful web of life because we are part of it. We are not separate from it.
Yeah, and I know Soka has a school garden here too that we were just learning about, which is fantastic.
Well, Soka has such an amazing campus. Just look at this auditorium. Yeah, I don't think there are too many institutions. You've got such beautiful grounds. I think it would be wonderful if your dining hall could become an organic dining hall where you produce your food.
I think there's some support for that. So now, moving from the seedling stage to the blooming stage, your college years were in Ontario, Canada. And you've said that you've really benefited from this mix of Eastern and Western in your life and in your upbringing. We're here at a university in California that also has Eastern ties, Soka, and we also have a very international student populace here. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about this idea that having the balance of Eastern and Western in life and in a university experience is really a benefit.
You know, I think, we suffered a period where it was assumed that the only civilization was the West. And, so much of colonization was based on civilizing the barbarians. But if you think of it, every religion, no matter what it is, it could be Christianity, it could be Islam, it could be Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, all religions have come from the East. They have all come from Asia. So already that wisdom tradition connects all of us. And on the basics, all religions teach you the same thing. No religion says, go starve your neighbor. Every religion says, give food to the hungry. Every religion says, take care of creation. They'll use different words for it. But all religions say it. And I think a new resurgence and a new harmony between East and West would do three things for us. First, it would contain the aggression against the earth, because we have turned consumerism into a new religion. We've turned the global market into a new idol for whom we've to bend and can't change it. The second thing it would do is create much more respect for diversity, which is what is so deeply threatened. All the violence in the world, whether it be the violence against the earth or violence between people, is all based on intolerance of diversity. And the more we do this dialogue, East and West, the more we cultivate peace through cultivating diversity. And the third thing, of course, is that I think the richer our diversity, the more human we become. This idea that there's the perfect religion, there's the perfect race, there's the perfect gender, and that perfection allows you to go, destroy the planet, kill people, is such an erroneous thinking. And we do need a return of the deeper thinking of the more ancient civilizations to guide our future. So there is well-being for all. I think whether it's Buddhism, which recognizes that all life is sentient and compassion is your ultimate duty, or the Indian saying, Sarve bhavantu sukhina, let all beings be happy. If only we could come down to those basics and shape our economies, our politics, our cultures, our relationships on that basis, we'd have more prosperity, we'd have more peace.
Beautiful. And now, in your college years, you also did a deep dive in science, and you're a woman of science as well. And you've criticized Western-style science as creating a monoculture of the mind. Can you explain a little bit about what you mean by this monoculture of the mind?
Well, first, I haven't criticized Western science across the board, otherwise I wouldn't have trained in quantum theory. Right. I have critiqued an obsolete model which should have been written off the human record 100 years ago. 100 years ago, we knew the world is a quantum world. 100 years ago, we knew the idea of the world as a machine of fragmented parts was relevant for 200 years. And I call it the fossilized paradigm that grew with the fossil age. Because what could coal do for you? What could oil do for you? Run machines. And so we created this mentality that the world is a machine. and a worldview that is mechanistic. It's a hugely inadequate way of understanding the world. And it is at the basis of so much of the ecological crisis we face. Because when you don't recognize the self-organization of the plants and the animals and the bacteria, you don't relate to them with the balance, harmony, and respect that would allow sustainability to happen. So my critique is really of this very narrow system, which not through a democracy of knowledge, but through an imposition, by just censoring every other knowledge. I'm thinking the founder of this very institution had to go to jail for a simple thing like children aren't little machines to be put out into a machine. Children are beautiful beings whose first objective should be happiness, and the purpose of education should be to allow their best potential to happen. So, a lot of my own learning is now a combination of three kinds of sciences. Non-mechanistic worldview of quantum theory, the ecological worldview, which is an amazing new worldview now, recognizing that the world is interconnected. The same principles we learn from quantum theory: non-separability, interconnectedness, potential, and indigenous knowledge. Both my respect and learning from the women of Chipko. But here's a system called Ayurveda, which is the Indian system of healing. The British tried to shut it down, just like they put the founder of Soka into jail in Japan. They tried to criminalize this amazing healing system, which is a science. And I was invited to give the 100th anniversary address to the Ayurvedic College. Okay. And that's where I realized what Ayurveda had suffered. Today, 1 in 3 people in this country is turning to Chinese and Indian medicine as a more reliable way of healing. So I think we just do need much more respect for pluralism in knowledge, particularly the knowledges that understand systems as a whole and therefore have a deeper understanding of how things are connected, that your brain is connected to your gut, and your gut is connected to the health of the soil, that you can't truncate all this and put one into soil chemistry and the other into science of the digestive tract and another into neurosciences.
Right, it's all connected.
It's all connected. That is what both the world, the earth, our lives are about. And sciences of interconnectedness are the most sophisticated sciences. But the Cartesian mechanistic paradigm gets very threatened by it and just calls it unscientific. But I'd love to have a ceremony one day to not just say no more extraction of oil and fossil fuels, but to simultaneously bury this fossilized paradigm.
Nice. And you mentioned Ayurveda. I've studied some Ayurveda as well, and fascinated by it. And I too think that it's too often missing from both the teachings here in terms of in medical school and the practice. So in looking at the belief of food as thy medicine and your connection to preserving and protecting our food source, how do you see it? How do you think that we can protect and preserve these ancient traditions and this knowledge so that it doesn't go away as well?
Well, in the Ayurvedic philosophy of food, it says very clearly, sarva aushadha. It is the medicine for all disease. And we are now realizing the deep connections between good food and good health, and bad food and bad health. And again, these were compartmentalized. Yeah. And my sister, who's a medical doctor and works, on many issues with me, she was saying that there is not a single class on food in a medical school. And hospitals are about the worst place for plastic food. And it got so bad, I remember, about 10 years ago, because they keep creating these these laws of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, which are pseudo-hygiene measures in my view. There's a group of nuns who used to bring cakes to hospital patients in England. And one day these phytosanitary measures were used to say, you can't bake cakes, they're dangerous for health. And here they're putting McDonald's and Coca-Cola for the patients.
Wow, they want to keep them in there.
They want to keep them in there. But I think this whole idea that food is medicine and food heals, it's being confirmed more and more. We do an annual festival called Bhumi, and we all offer an annual course on food and agriculture and sustainability. And this year we're going to be calling a scientist from France who was a government scientist, and when he was made to look at the applications for GMO safety, he found how sloppy they were. He said, but we must know more, so he went back to university and started research, and he's the one who found, with a 2-year study, liver and kidney damage and mammalian tumors. The story of the industry hounding him is something I won't talk about, but he's done a new book with a chef. So the chef does the cooking, and the chef brings the fresh vegetables, and he then does the cellular analysis. And healthy food, food with aroma, fresh food, actually talk the cells into health. That's why good food heals, and bad food spreads disease. And 75% of all diseases today are food-related. Whether it's the epidemic of cancer because of the pesticides, whether it's the autism, the neurological problem, the obesity, the diabetes, the cardiovascular diseases, the hypertensions, just touch anything. And we've built up this movement for seed saving, we've built up the whole movement for organic in India, and then the farmers are the ones who came and said, and now you've got to help us bring this to the market. So we also help them with a fair trade system. And so many people who come to Navdanya to buy organic come because they're so sick that they can't afford to continue to poison themselves.
Wow. Okay, let's talk about Monsanto.
My favorite company, absolutely.
She knew it was coming. So you've said that they are trying to impose food totalitarianism. And I think, we have over 100 high school students in the audience. We have a tremendous amount of Soka University students in the audience, and we have community members. So if you could just explain to us, what does that mean? What is the situation with Monsanto?
When I use the term food totalitarianism, I mean 3 things. First, that corporations like Monsanto are shaping laws that have no basis in law, no basis in science, no basis in ethics, no basis in justice, to say we are the creators and inventors of seed when we do genetic engineering, and therefore we'll have a patent. But what does a patent do? A patent prevents a farmer from saving seed. It turns seed saving the highest duty we have, because seed is the continuity to the future. And all cultures have recognized to not save seed is a sin, because you're disrupting the chances of the future. And here is a company that writes laws. They have admitted they wrote the intellectual property laws of the World Trade Organization. And they're basically writing laws that farmers shouldn't save seed. That it's their right to create a monopoly. And this monopoly in India around one crop, the cotton, the BT cotton, has created such huge totalitarianism. And farmers have got into debt. Now we have 300,000 farmer suicides. And fortunately now the government of India is acting. It said you can't charge these high prices. You can't take these huge royalties. And our Competition Commission, which is the antitrust court of India, just said this is a monopoly. So that's one side of the totalitarianism. But the other side of the totalitarianism is your experience in this country? A few years ago, you in California wanted to put on the ballot the right to know whether you're eating GMOs or not. And that labeling initiative was crushed with pouring, I think it was 45 million, if I remember, into advertising and misleading people. And same happened with Washington, same happened with Oregon, same happened with Colorado. But Vermont, which is a very special state, and I think it's a special state because it is so marginal that it can do little things without anyone noticing. And so they managed to pass the labeling law. And what do you get? The Monsantos and the Grocery Manufacturer Association joining up to push an act which has been nicknamed the Dark Act, the denial to Americans of the right to know, by passing acts to preempt the Vermont law. And basically to replace the right to know with gimmickry like saying, we're going to put complex codes, and then you've got to have a smartphone which will read that data, and then you can figure out. Suppose you don't want to carry a smartphone. And so many of my colleagues, my own son, has started knowing what these gadgets are doing to our brains and everything else. People are putting this as stuff aside. You can't make your food dependent on a phone. You should make your phone dependent on food. But the third kind of totalitarianism is what I would call knowledge totalitarianism, where here is a very false claim of inventing life, a false claim of making a machine. That's the kind of legal decisions in the courts in this country, that seed is a self-replicating machine invented by Monsanto. And Farmer Bowman saving seed on his field or buying grain from an elevator and growing a soya crop is stealing this self-replicating machine. Now, with all of this, including the false science of saying one gene creates one trait, doesn't work that way. Each gene is participating in many traits. Every trait has a contribution from many genes. So this totally linear correlation, that's not how life works. Genes and genomes are fluid. They're changing, they're self-organizing, they're self-regulating. And with all of this, you turn around and say that this is science, and the scientists who do the research on what harm the glyphosate is doing, the Roundup is doing, the GMOs are doing, you hound them out as anti-science. And I know so many really good scientists whose labs have been shut, whose work has been stopped, who've lost their jobs. And I always say, they go after me too, but they can't take away a job from me because I gave up a job in 1982. So, but there's nothing they can take away from me. So, but that is totalitarianism, and my deep, deep commitment to freedom, and my love and passion for science as knowing is part of the reason. No matter how much they try and threaten me, no matter how many journalists they put after me, I just will do my work with love and fearlessness.
Wonderful. We've talked a little bit about the Dark Act, and I think it's really important that when the audience leaves the room this evening, that they're armed with information, right? So, especially with this monoculture or lock-on knowledge. So how, for those living here in California, and they go to the supermarket and there's bananas, or they're buying clothes and it's one cotton versus another cotton, and if the labeling isn't happening, then how can they be empowered to make the better decision?
Well, it's because labeling isn't happening that two things have happened in this country, and I think everyone should participate in one or the other of the alternatives. The one is to know what you're eating without the labeling by going to a farmer's market and knowing your farmer. Or even better, having a little patch, food in your balcony. I don't know if you have flat roofs. out here to be able to grow on terraces. But every space where the sun shines and soil can be put, food can grow. We were made to believe the only place food will grow will be the Midwest. And we've got to get it. I mean, even we were told India should stop producing her own food. We should import from the Midwest. Thank goodness we continued to grow our food. So grow your food, go to a farmer's market, be part of a CSA. The second is because of, and it began really with the California initiative. When this was killed, a lot of small organic businesses started to join together and create what they call a non-GMO label, where they test for GMOs. I mean, which means the good guys are having to bear the additional burden, but they've done it. And this non-GMO label is overtaking the companies who are refusing to label. So there's some, organic cereal producers that are starting to take away from Kellogg's market. And those are two options right now, even while you continue to demand a fundamental right that 64 countries have. 64 countries have laws on mandatory labeling. And I think it's just not right that the country that's called the biggest democracy in the world should not have food democracy and the right to know what you eat.
Yeah, agreed. So we know that you've initiated and are taking part in a Monsanto tribunal, correct?
Yes.
So share with us, what is that, and are there ways that we can support your efforts there as well?
Well, over the last 1 or 2 years, because of the issue of this totalitarianism I was mentioning, and the fact that both the chemicals, like glyphosate and like Roundup, which are now recognized by the World Health Organization to be a carcinogen, and California has recognized this and said, you've got to put a label saying it's a probable carcinogen. Agent Orange. The vets here are still suffering. In Vietnam, children are still being born, damaged. I mentioned the Indian farmers and how high a price they have paid for these monopolies. Argentina. In Argentina, children are being born with birth defects about 10 times higher rate. Cancers. And because Argentina has been overtaken by Roundup-ready soya, they spray from aeroplanes. And the small farm, which was growing food, all that food is killed. So what the Monsanto Tribunal is, and we are a large number of organizations that have joined hand, I basically said, what we need is to bring together all the evidence from since the time of Agent Orange, of the harm Monsanto has done. And all the evidence from around the world, which is fragmented. If you're being sprayed on in Argentina, you know the harm. But that story doesn't reach others who are also acting on similar issues. I was in Ventura County yesterday, and they want to spray neonicotinoids because there's a new pest in the citrus fruit. So this right to just spray poison, I think it's really a violation of fundamental human rights. And the tribunal will be held in The Hague. It'll be a public tribunal. The Hague is where the International Criminal Court is. The tribunal will not yet be in the criminal court. But there was another tribunal after the war. It was called the Nuremberg trial. Same companies. Monsanto wasn't in that because it was largely German companies. And Monsanto is now trying to get married to these German companies. It's trying to merge with either Bayer or BASF because Syngenta rejected them. And now Syngenta has been bought up by ChemChina. So we really have about 5 giants, poison makers, who married their poisons to GM seeds, collect royalties from farmers, and all of this, which every citizen doesn't know. We want to use the tribunal to create more awareness. We want to use the tribunal to put all the evidence in place so that what happened with slavery is what happens with this new totalitarianism. Slavery didn't disappear overnight. There were people who assumed it was their right to buy and sell and own other human beings. And was treated as a natural right. And then groups formed, the abolition movement was created, and eventually it entered law. So we are basing the tribunal on crimes against nature and crimes against humanity. But because these crimes are prevalent all over the planet, what we are planning to do over and above what will happen in The Hague is people's assemblies. And I do hope you here in Soka and the community around here, or the schools, organize an assembly to just ask two simple questions. What has happened to our food and agriculture? What's wrong with it? And who is driving this? And what's the kind of food system that will protect the planet's health and our health? And this is a discussion and dialogue we need everywhere. The tribunal will be on the 15th and 16th of October. 16th is World Food Day. But these people's assemblies, we are inviting people to organize them anytime between 2nd October, which is Gandhi's birth anniversary, and you have an amazing statue of Gandhi, and I stood with Gandhi this afternoon for a photograph, and 16th October, World Food Day. Because if we do not reclaim our food democracy, if we do not create more awareness amongst ourselves and join hands to create a better system, that better system won't get created.
And I think it's important that you are setting this on the international stage in The Hague. I think that's a fantastic move, and I think a lot of the pushing has come from this woman right here. So thank you for that. She is a force. Recently, in December, on the international stage, climate change in Paris and the Paris Agreement, both countries from around the world and businesses from around the world have now taken a stand and signed on to a climate change agreement. And I know that there definitely is a tie between industrial agriculture and climate change. And could you speak a little bit to how you see the interconnection and possible solutions there as well?
You know, before Copenhagen, because the last big summit was Copenhagen on climate change, it was subverted. We didn't really get an agreement out of it. But before that, I had started to realize that a big part of the climate change problem was industrial farming and globalized trade in agriculture. And I did the calculations on the basis of IPCC data. At that point, it was about 45%. Today, it is 50%. Of all greenhouse gases that are destabilizing our climate are coming from the way we produce our food. Carbon dioxide from the huge dependence on fossil fuels. Nitrogen oxide from the increasing use of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, which are based on fossil fuels, but then they emit this nitrogen oxide, which is 300 times more destabilizing for the atmosphere than carbon dioxide is. And huge amounts of methane. Some of it coming from the fact that 50% of the food that's grown is wasted and thrown away. Either because uniformity has been so privileged that if your tomato has a personality, it can't reach the supermarket shelf. It has to be thrown away. Huge amounts of waste. And California is among the worst in waste at the farm level, where the peaches and the apples and the cabbages are just thrown away. And they all land in garbage dumps. Or because of the best before date, in supermarkets, the Walmarts, as well as the fact that we've developed a culture of huge servings and then throwing away. All of that is then leading to methane, and then the factory farms. So 50% of the problem is industrial farming. 100% of the solution is organic farming. 100%. Why do I say that? This agreement on climate change has a gap between what governments have committed and what we need to do to reduce the amounts of pollution in the air in order to keep the temperature increase below 2 degrees centigrade, because beyond that it will be absolute catastrophe. The gap is what is, we say 10 gigatons. You can get rid of 10 gigatons by putting more carbon back in the soil through organic matter recycling, through intensifying your forestry systems, having more trees. Every step we take to heal the earth is also an answer to climate change. On the other hand, the same people who gave us an industrial farming model are waiting in the wings with something they call climate smart agriculture. This word smart, you know, every time they use smart, there's something dumb behind it. And the dumbness is the fertilizer industry say more fertilizer will be a solution to climate change. Monsanto says more spraying of Roundup will be a solution to climate change. I'm having to advise the Nepalese because that's what they're going there and saying. So, you know, the climate issue is very, very much an area where the agriculture interface comes. And very often people think climate change is something way beyond them. But every time you eat and how you eat and what you eat is a climate solution or part of the climate problem.
And with industrial agriculture, there's climate change. There's also been the issues that you talked about in terms of the Chipko women and gender inequality and poverty and links to poverty. And then you've also mentioned the suicides with the farmers in India as well. So how does the ecological activism and the social justice sphere interrelate?
Well, it interrelates at every level. At the issue of gender, you know, it's not that women don't work, even though the way you calculate who works, women don't work if they work in the house or they work in care, because the definition of growth is if you produce what you consume, you don't produce. So you can be working away morning till evening, cooking, cleaning, but you're not working because it's not going out as someone's profit. And that's all the GDP measures. So you protect a forest, there's no growth. You chop the forest, you have growth. You have good food, no growth. Sell more pesticides, sell more GMOs, take away the power of women, people fall sick. Same companies that sold you the agri-chemicals and agritoxins now can be, here's a patented cancer drug. So for them, every disease for the planet and us is a new market. On the other hand, women's economies have always been about caring and sharing. And any step at destruction of this ethics and value of caring and sharing is a huge assault on women's status. Because the more women are devalued and their contributions are devalued, the more the license to be more violent increases. My book, Earth Democracy, has a whole chapter on violence against women. The fact that as you get into this commodity system, nothing has value, everything has a price. That devaluation then allows, for example, in India, 30 million girls to not be allowed to be born. That's the number for female feticide. And it's that same logic that plays into this violence. The other level at which ecological sustainability and social justice are so intimately related is the fact that most environmental harm is done through dumping toxics and wastes on communities that are less privileged. And so you see the rise of environmental racism. But on the positive side, social justice and ecological sustainability are connected because this earth is what supports us. This earth is what gives us livelihoods. And the two amazing sources of wisdom from India that I'd like to just share with you briefly. We have an ancient text called the Isho Upanishad. And it says, this universe and this earth is for the benefit of all beings. No one species or person has the right to take away others' share. And when you take away others' share, you are nothing but a thief. So you steal from nature, you steal from other people or the future generations. And Gandhi distilled this into his very, very famous saying, the earth has enough for everyone's needs, but not for a few people's greed.
We launched the Women in Green Forum, this annual conference series, 7 years ago. And part of the reason was we were involved in producing a number of environmental conferences and trade shows here and around the globe, and noticed that for some reason at the podium, the conference agenda was always about 99% male. And so we felt we needed to create a venue where we highlighted that there are amazing women in the space, in the environmental fields, and showcase them at the podium, and also encourage more younger women to enter the field so that we'd create this pipeline and boost women up. So you've been a woman in science, you've been a woman in biotech, you've been a woman in environmental activism, and I wanted for you to share with us what that's been like in terms of your journey as a woman in some of these male-dominated spaces, and also share some advice with those out here today.
Well, being a woman in largely male-dominated and patriarchal-dominated systems, you can treat it as a reason for marginalization, or you can treat it as a reason for a better place to create an alternative. Because in ecosystems, it's the margins of ecosystems where the emergence of new phenomena happens. And because women have not been at the heart of a structure of denial of the life of the earth, a denial of women's knowledge, they are able to perceive the world in a richer way. They anyway have all those responsibilities of taking care of the kids, taking care of a parent who's ill. And that has also meant they can't walk away from responsibility. And they have to be multifunctional. That's why I love the image of Indian goddesses. Lots of hands. And every woman ends up being a goddess because she has to have more than 2 hands just to be able to live. I have edited a new book which is out in this country now from North Atlantic, and it's called Seed, Sovereignty and Food Security, Women in the Vanguard. And basically for me, it's honoring all the women who at the grassroots are saving seeds, working on agroecology, resisting Monsanto in Argentina, in Bangladesh, but also the scientists. Because it is the women scientists who've been able to speak the truth about science. Mae Wan Ho, we just lost a dear friend who just died of cancer. She always talked about the fluid genome. Stephanie Seneff, an MIT scientist, who's the one working on what glyphosate Roundup and GMOs are doing to our health, to our gut, because they're killing the bacteria in our gut, and that bacteria is what produces the enzymes that then release and create the neurotransmitters that allow our brain to function. Now, Monsanto has said repeatedly, glyphosate can't affect humans because we don't have what is called a shikimate pathway. Plants have it, and they say that's why plants die when Roundup is sprayed. But we are 6 trillion cells in our body. of which only 600 million are human cells. The rest are bacteria. We are walking bacteria. And our gut is the richest biome in the world. And when that amazing bacteria that's doing so much that our cells can't do, including maintaining our brain, when they are killed because they have a shikimate pathway, we see all the new consequences. Stephanie Seneff's piece starts to raise some of these questions. And I remember, I was very active. I was advising my government on the Convention on Biological Diversity and the negotiations for the Earth Summit. And, in the beginning, we had some men talking about safety, risk assessment, etc. But because they were privileged and they were part of a club, pressure was brought on them. If you go and say this, you're going to lose your tenure. If you go and speak, you will lose your job. So bit by bit, they started to withdraw. And one day I'm seeing around the table, the only people left to talk about safety in the context of GMOs was a few of us women scientists. That's the day I created Diverse Women for Diversity. And we really became the reason that governments had the strength to implement the laws for safety, called biosafety laws.
So this evening's title is On the Future of the Planet. And I know we've spent a lot of time talking about your journey to today. So let's look a little bit toward the future. One of the things that's come up is on the future of food, and that scientists in the Netherlands and other parts of the world are actually cultivating meat in a lab. So they're growing a hamburger patty in a lab from cells. Now, they would argue that that has a lesser impact on the environment because they're not growing cows and those types of things. But what does that impact look like, both on the environment and on our guts, we're walking bacteria, right? So what is the impact on us if we're eating cultured meat or cultured food?
Well, that work will have to be done, of course. But I find it a bit of a desperate solution. So you have meat, and then you created factory farming. And instead of just realizing that there are so many sources of food, and we, as human beings, should be eating far more plant-based diets. Even if you eat meat, eat a little less. And this is the year of pulses. The United Nations has announced 2016 to be the year of pulses. Pulses are amazing sources of protein. I would just say, I would take those scientists from the Dutch labs and take them to the Navdanya farm and let them realize there's delicious food to be had. Just diversify the farms and diversify your diets and diversify your brain. You don't have to culture meat in the lab. The planet is willing to give us a lot more, if only we would start caring more for her.
Now, I've said this to you, that it's been amazing spending time with you today, and I feel like you have this spirit and this smile from your eyes, from your heart. You smile with your eyes, and it's very special. And I wanted to ask you, why Vandana Shiva? What is it about you, about your spirit, about what comes from inside of you that has allowed you to have this global impact?
Well, I wouldn't be able to, say that, but all I know is the principles I've lived by. I've lived by my conscience. I've never, ever tried to say, no, it's more convenient to do this for the time being. Crushing your conscience is never convenient, because ultimately your conscience is your guide. The second, my parents told me, they said, at the end of the day, when you live by your conscience, there's nothing you have to be afraid of, because that's the highest power. It's the highest guide. And therefore, fearlessness becomes very natural, because living by your values, living by your conscience becomes the first thing. And over the years, I have a beautiful son, He's now 33 years, he's been an amazing teacher. But relationships teach you compassion, relationships teach you love, and when you love the earth and you love your fellow human beings and you love those around you and you try and give your best, not only do you get joy, you also get strength.
Beautiful. All right, so I'm going to, in a minute, I'm going to open it up to audience Q&A. I know there are a lot of questions. We do have mics, one here, one over here, one on the top, and one on the top. So I will take questions in the order 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you want to start lining up at the mics, please go ahead. I'm going to end with one final question for Dr. Shiva from myself. Really because we're in the university setting, and again, we have both high school and college students, and we have lifelong students in the audience as well. What are some words of wisdom that you can give those who are looking at either embarking in a career that has an environmental focus or an activist focus, and they will hit some challenges? You face many challenges, many opposition forces against you. Any final words of advice for them? And then we'll start with the audience after that.
Yeah, I think whatever choice you make, whether you're very young or you're in university or you are a little white-haired, because we're still making choices at this stage, and in fact, seniors have even more options than the young ones. I think the two things we just need to realize very simply. First, that we're in a very strange economic system where 62 men are controlling half the wealth of the planet. Now, those 62 men want to control all the wealth of the planet, and then there won't be 62 men, there'll probably be 30. And they're not thinking of how to create an opportunity for you. They're just thinking of how to play another financial trick or a new intellectual property trick or another free trade trip, TPP, TTIP, to basically become fewer and bigger. So we are at that moment where we have to be much more creative. And we have to realize that the biggest opportunities don't come from the 62 men, they come from the earth. And those opportunities are opportunities where we can converge caring for the earth with creating our own options. In this country, during the Depression, the solution was the Conservation Corps, where everyone was put on work, and the work was conservation. Because we're not in that kind of moment where governments will do this, but as communities we can. And as communities we have to be part of building new economies, economies that protect the earth, economies that give us meaningful work, and economies that create better well-being for all. That is an amazing challenge. And I know so many young people are engaging in it. More and more young people are turning to this kind of creative work. But, there are two categories that are doing very well still. And that's the people who go to finance and the people who go to information technology and biotechnology. But at our farm, where we offer courses and training, half the people who come, most of it is for farmers, but for courses that are not for farmers, half the Indians who come are people from information technology and the banking world. They've made all the money they could, they're bored to death, they have burnout, they've got stress, they've got hypertension, probably have diabetes, and they're seeking another way. All of them want to be organic farmers. Yeah? But the wonderful thing about the food system is, it is so diverse. You could be a seed saver, seed producer. Some of the best heirloom seed companies are young people who became passionate about seed. There's this Baker Street, and they do a big heirloom expo in Marin County in September. So many young people getting into cooking. All the CSAs I know, young people. Food communities, food gardens, edible schoolyards, public health, working to make sure the Dark Act doesn't go through. That too is part of work in food democracy.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to take our first question. Please keep your question short so that we can get I know there are a number of questions. We'll go to this mic first.
Good evening, Dr. Shiva. I just wanted to thank you so much for coming to our community and sharing your knowledge and your spirit and your inspiration with us. When I saw the movie, I was in tears just because it has moved me so much to know that you're there and you're educating people and doing the work that you do. I also wanted to share with you that I'm a parent and a substitute teacher at a local school 5 minutes away called Journey Waldorf Charter School. And I didn't know if you know this, but we're a green ribbon school. And one of the ways I think that we can do what you're saying is be like our school. And for example, the children, the kindergartners, we eat millet. And I didn't even know what millet was before I came to the school. My son loves millet. And we eat everything organic. The parents buy the food and it's prepared for the students in the kindergarten classroom, and they eat all organic food. And before that, I didn't know about quinoa and all these wonderful things. And we have gardens in the school. The children play in the school amidst the gardens. And I'd like to invite you in the audience, if you want to see some of what she was talking about in action, democracy in action is at our school, Journey School. But my question is kind of a confession, actually. My mother lives with me and my son, and one of the things she does, she's from Brazil and she's older, and one of the things she does is she saves all the seeds of everything. So we have peppers and she'll take all the little seeds and save them. And then we have a pear and she'll take all the seeds and save them. And so she puts them all over the place and saves them. And for a while I was feeling guilty because I was throwing the seeds away. And so, because she has memory issues and she doesn't remember, sometimes she does and she doesn't. So I feel guilty that I did that and I don't want to do that. So what should I do with the seeds that she saves?
Well, join her in seed saving and spreading the seeds. Create a local community seed bank. Share it with those who don't have a mother who saves the seeds.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, next question. Please be brief.
Okay, so first of all, this was really awesome and interesting, but what I was actually wondering was, how do you feel about all the honors and the peace prizes that were given to you?
Well, you know, I'm grateful I've got these prizes, but if I made myself so vulnerable that is what decides what I do, I'd have to be vulnerable to all the stone throwing I also receive. So I take it as part of life and continue to do what I need to do.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go up to the upper level here.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. That was such a great answer, such an inspiration. Thank you also for being such a force of passion and justice. So my question is, how do we become a part of systemic change? So you mentioned that every time we choose what we eat, when we eat, how we eat, we make a change. But how do we become part of the bigger change, the systemic change that I think is necessary?
Well, I think the first systemic change takes place in our minds. The minute we give up a militarized worldview, the minute we give up a monoculture of the mind, you're already making a systemic change. The second is when you realize everything is interconnected. You don't have to imagine that you have to be everything. You don't have to be in Washington, D.C. and have a school garden and save seeds with your mother. No. But you can be in connection with others who do other pieces of the work. And seeing the connections means seeing yourself as part of the web of life. That's the place where it all begins. And when you touch one part of the web of life with care, that ripple effect goes through the systems change.
Okay, next question over here, upper level.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shiva. So my question is that we can't really, I was an advocate for organic food for a long time, but we can't really deny that mass productions actually make GMO and fertilized crops cheaper. So yeah, I just graduated from Soka University last year, and I just feel that as a young working person right now, I have so little time in staying in a rental unit. What can I really do to really support these causes where buying organic food becomes so expensive and I couldn't actually afford to go to Whole Foods sometime? And how can I still thinking that I can do something for the future of the planet?
Well, you know, this idea that organic food is expensive and chemical food and GMOs are cheap is such a false idea. It's false because those fertilizers aren't cheap to produce. The GMOs have behind them not just the millions and millions and millions in the development of one crop, but the huge amounts, the billions of royalties taken from farmers. A GMO seed is not cheap, and therefore a GMO crop is not cheap. It becomes cheap because of subsidies. $400 billion goes to subsidize industrial farming every year. That's more than $1 billion a day. Can you imagine what $1 billion would do? There's another layer to this whole cheapness issue, and that has to do with the fact that as the food gets degraded, of course it becomes cheaper because of subsidies, because of concessions, because of not bearing responsibility. But if you add the environmental costs and you add the health costs, and we have a book on this, on true cost accounting, we call it Wealth Per Acre. $1.2 trillion is the environmental damage by chemical agriculture in India alone. That's as much as our GDP. Globally, I would imagine we are destroying the planet and societies to the scale of at least 10 trillion. Add the health damage, you can add another 5 trillion to it. So it's not cheap because you get that high fructose corn syrup, which is cheaper than natural sugar, and then babies are having cirrhosis of the liver because all your food has high fructose corn syrup. And you can do that with every element. And that burden on healthcare is yours to pay. Then it's not cheap. So we need to go for the true cost system. And that which creates positive externalities, beneficial for the planet, beneficial for our health. And this true cost system will only be built by people becoming more aware of these hidden costs and making the choices and making the decisions. So the next time you think organic is costly, just think of all the diseases avoided.
Thank you very much.
Next question over here.
Dr. Shiva, thank you so much. I love your sarcastic humor. So, well, you are a big target. So, I mean, you know, me being a small environmental activist, I'm often frustrated. So, good to see people like you. Now, what keeps you going? Can you share one secret?
You know, what I'll share with you is a story. And it is, I realize, that's what keeps me going. So I had done this big study on mining in my valley, and one particular mine was not in the map, in the government maps. So the women came to my office and said, "Why did you leave us out? What do you have against us?" And I said, "No, your mine wasn't on the map." They said, "Will you help us? If we start a Chipko of the mountain, will you help us?" I said, "Sure." So I used to go. And one day, the miners brought a bunch of goons to attack these women who were sitting to block the mines. and they hit them with stones and iron rods, and someone broke her head, someone broke her arm. And when I got this message, I'm talking of time before cell phones, etc., someone had to physically come on a motorbike to tell me this had happened. And I said, I'll come with you. So I rushed to this village. It took me about 5 hours. 5 hours driving and then another 2 hours walking. And I expected to find these women in their homes. They're sitting exactly in the same spot with bandages on their head, And I said, how are you here? What keeps you going? Exactly the same question. This beautiful woman, Itwari Devi, she's no more. We're walking along the bank of the stream. And she said, we're walking in the grass, and the grass bounces right back. I take leaves from these trees to feed my animals, and the leaves come right back. That Shakti, this is the word for power, for feminine energy, Shakti. The Shakti in that leaf, in that grass, is the Shakti in us. Every one of us has that Shakti.
The next question over here.
Hi. So I work here at the Soka Instructional Garden, and so on the topic of pesticides and genetic modification, I just wanted to know, if there's sort of a place where we can reconcile, totally small-scale organic farming with being able to find new ways using technology or genetic modification to solve the issues that are really plaguing farmers who are, their crop yields are being affected by invasives, pests and disease. In our garden we actually have an issue with an invasive weed, and since we're committed to not using pesticides, we usually manually remove the weeds. But as a result, it takes away a lot of time from engaging with community members or using that space to grow food for the cafeteria. And so we're sort of making a compromise with, not using pesticides at all, but we're also, we're losing a lot in the process. And so we have the privilege of not subsisting off of this farm. This is just supplemental to the cafeteria. But for farmers who are totally living off of their land, I would see the appeal of using pesticides or the appeal of using seeds that promise to not, to not succumb to these illnesses and to these problems that, that farmers have faced for years and years. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, if poison-based technologies, which is what pesticides and herbicides are, and they all come from war, if they were effective in controlling pests, your argument might work. But we have more pests as a result of using pesticides, for the simple scientific reason that when you spray a poison, you kill beneficial insects. And the way pests are controlled is when there is a pest-predator balance, and spiders and ladybird beetles are eating pests in the web of life. When the beneficial insects go, the pests increase. But the second is, pests also increase because evolution is the nature of evolution. And when you spray a pesticide, pests become resistant to that pesticide. In the case of GMOs, the bollworm has become resistant to the Bt toxin. The weeds have become resistant to the Roundup. So we have half the farms of this country overtaken by superweeds. In India, we have superweed pests in the Bt cotton fields. So it is actually a failed technology for pest control and weed control. And the more sophisticated way to control pests and weeds is not through poisons and GMOs, but through agroecology and biodiversity. On our farm, and if some of you come for We do a 1-month course on agroecology. We have internships. We don't have to manage any pest because diversity of species is taking care of that. When you have good cover crops, you never have weeds. All of the pests are a symptom of an agriculture out of balance. Weeds are a symptom of an agriculture out of balance. We've got to bring the balance back.
Okay, we have time for one more question, which will come from right up here.
Hi, Dr. Shiva. First of all, I totally agree with your assessment of Monsanto. And I think we have to look no further than the revolving door at the FDA, the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, to know that Monsanto has its tentacles in our government and greatly affects us. But my question for you is, the talk here was future of the planet, and our population is going to double probably in the next 40 or 50 years. And we're going to have to be more productive and generate more food. And how do you see us doing that? I mean, what's the solution there? Do you see a solution where GMOs can work for the good? Certainly by increasing productivity. I know the Roundup story and what that's all about, but do you see a scenario where GMOs could be used? And if not, what's the solution to feeding twice the population that we have right now?
So, the issue of productivity and yield is like the issue of management of pests and weeds. Sadly, GMOs don't increase yields. It's not in the nature of the technology. The nature of genetic engineering is to take a gene with one trait. In this case, for example, a Bt gene that expresses a toxin. And then you add an antibiotic resistance marker, you add viral promoters. But the gene of Bt does not change the yield. The yield comes from the original plant. The plant could be bred by farmers, it could be bred by public breeders, it could be a hybrid sold by a company. The yield comes from the plant, not from the introduced gene. And therefore, yield is a product of conventional breeding. That's the science of the issue. Overall, there has been a yield drag because of genetic engineering. Why does this happen? Because your plants actually are now performing a super hyper function, which they weren't designed to do. A cotton plant or a corn plant wasn't designed to express a Bt toxin in every cell all the time. As a result of which, it's unable to control pests and diseases and becomes more vulnerable to that. It becomes more vulnerable to a drought, and therefore yields start to decline. But yields also start to decline because the soil, microorganisms are being killed. The pollinators, which contribute 1/3 of our food, are being killed. So the system that gives us food is being disrupted. Now, all of this means that we cannot afford to go down a way where we are reducing the availability of our food. 90% of the corn and soya, GM corn and soya grown for feeding the world, 90% grows for biofuel and animal feed, not human food. How do we address the issue of an increasing population, more food? By intensifying, not through chemicals and toxics, not through more totalitarianism, not through more inability to evolve resilience, but through growing resilience and growing biodiversity. Our work in India with Navdanya, where we intensify biodiversity and ecological processes, we have wealth per acre showing the externalities, but also the 10-fold higher incomes for organic farmers who have their own seed. We have another report called Health Per Acre, and it's available on the Navdanya website, navdanya.org. We measure nutrition per acre. And with more biodiversity you have, the less land you need to use and the more nutrition you produce. We can feed 2 times the planet without increasing acreage. GMOs have led to the worst devastation of increasing acreage. We're growing soya bean in the Amazon, in the savannas. This expansion is a footprint we are not even noticing. But all of it, not to give you food, but to torture the animals in factory farms. So the real food system, a true food system, produces food that nourishes the planet and us. That is not what industrial farming or GMOs are giving us. We've got to move out of the commodity attitude to food. We've got to get out of the idea of accepting the worst of toxins in our food. We've got to get out of the assumption that 4 corporations will control our lives and our food, and move into the recognition that we are members of the Earth family with 300 million species, and working with those other species and our best knowledge and creativity, we can feed not just 7 billion people, but 14 billion.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us this evening and for sharing your time and for spending time with Dr. Vandana Shiva and myself. It's been quite an evening, and it's not over yet. We are wrapping up the session here, but we will have some time with Dr. Vandana Shiva. She will be signing books in the lobby. There also will be a dessert reception out there, so please feel free to join us. And one last time, Dr. Vandana Shiva.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.